Chapter 5. The Fall of Folesk. You appear a bit low this evening, Elior poked a pun. The tiny man slowly rose from his seat, still smiling, keeping his composure despite being greeted with a jest about his stature. It was the first time I had a better look at him. I estimated he stood no more than 1.5 arm lengths tall. I took notice of the thick fog rolling in and the beady eyes glowing from the treetops. I knew they were birds by flapping their wings and low squawking. The forest was dense, and I felt a chill run over the back of my neck. I thought it was Nasha breathing behind me, but no. He stood next to me, as did Elior. "I have seen this one before," I said to Elior, in the unlight, when he temptingly contravened me. I merely wished to see what sparked Elior's interest, the tiny man's voice rasped. "Surely you cannot fault my curiosity. You nearly put a bit in my skull, my dear." "Shall I try again?" I spat, reaching for my drill bit gun. "Oh, she's a fiery lass," the tiny man chuckled. "I do believe I'm beginning to like her more." "Enough of the banter," Elior calmly interjected and grabbed a hold of my arm to keep me from pulling my drill bit gun from its holster. The MKR peered upward, drawing a deep breath, making the tiny man snicker again. "You have not changed," the tiny man teased, "still seeking all these years, yet still afraid to look in the one place you know you should. Where might that be?" I boldly stepped forward. The tiny man's posture turned towards me, and his eyes squinted harshly. "Why, in the gloom, of course," he replied. "What did we come here for?" I heard Nasha pipe up to Elior. "Good question," the tiny man perked up. "What did you come here for, my dear Elior? Was it to introduce me to your 2 new pupils, or talk some more about the ones you have lost?" Elior did not appear to be fazed by the questioning at all. He removed his top hat and scratched the back of his head, then proceeded to place his hat back upon his head. "What is he on about?" Nasha asked. "I told you," Elior replied. "Your life would utterly be in danger if you agreed to become what you now are. You have remained with me, and thus you are following me on my quest." "Still calling it a quest?" the tiny man teased again. "At this point, I think you would start calling it a sacrifice." "I will find him," Elior replied. "The longer you play the game," the tiny man sang, "the stronger he becomes, the more likely he will find you." The fog rolled in, and the tiny man disappeared, quenching the fire and most of my boldness. He had laughed vilely before taking his leave, and it still echoed, fading as the sound of the wind blew through the trees and took hold of the night. Elior was staring at where the tiny man once stood. His face had never held such concern before as I knew him, and dare I say, a portrayal of fear emanated as his eyes kept their gaze. "Who was that?" Nasha demanded, breaking the eerie silence. "He is one of the 3, Elior replied, not turning to face us. "One of the creatures of nightmares." The first was Wendigo, as Elior elaborated, and I had already experienced its power. I interjected to describe what I had witnessed to Nasha, Wendigo's insatiable influence to torture the spirit to starve, turning hunger into a despicable lust for human flesh. Elior then repossessed the conversation and spoke of Wendigo and his previous encounters with the abomination. In Elior's first encounter, he spoke as if Wendigo had almost killed him, and each time he faced Wendigo alone, he was so exhausted that he had to run. "So, is that why you need us?" Nasha blurted out. "If you at MKR cannot kill the creature, what makes you think we can?" "Is that what happened to your other pupils?" I joined in, feeling somewhat anxious. "Did Wendigo kill them?" "No," Elior replied. He stared at both of us with sorrow in his eyes. "I did." "You!" Nasha shouted. "Why did you—" "Because I had to." Elior's eyes glowed a fiery gold that threw Nasha and me back on our heels as he whipped his head to face us. "They betrayed me." "How did they betray you?" I boldly stepped forward after seeing Elior's eyes calm. "I thought I would take a different approach this time," Elior tried to explain, but did not reveal details of what he had done. I brought you out here to meet him, instead of trying to protect you from him. If you met him, I thought it might sway you not to be led astray. Then, please clarify, I pressed. His name is Rumpelstiltskin, Elior whispered. Do not speak his name aloud any other time, else he will hear you and know where you are. He carries magic that can lure and torture the heart. He pries to find what is vulnerable, then exploits it for his gain. It is vicious magic that grants him the ability to persuade and induce. He tempts hearts to move into the dark, thus betraying everything they hold dear, including what they once loved. The winds that bring him are swift, with a chill greater than death. Unlike Wendigo, he does not remain in the unlight. He goes where he pleases and does what he pleases, only bound to the greater shadow. You are describing the suzerain Afar, Ninasha gasped. What does that mean? I asked. Ninasha sent his gaze toward me. It means sovereign in the gloom, he replied. This creature is well known in Nod, at least in bedtime stories. He is no story, Elior reassured. He brings an existence of nightmares to those who trust him. He burdens families with a price too high to pay for their desires, and in the end, they are consumed to be his shadowy puppets. Is that why you had to kill your pupils? Ninasha asked, his eyes almost pushing out tears. Is that why you warned us that you would kill us if we betrayed you? What choice does Elior have? I interjected. If that monster turns hearts against one another, then there is no bringing them back, Ninasha concluded. Twice this has happened, Elior elucidated. Twice I have gained pupils, and twice they turned. Twice I tried to protect them. Twice I tried to keep them away from him. I needed to do something different this time. How did he turn them? I asked. Elior could not say. Ninasha and I drew closer to hear the MKR's voice roll into a hush. He will tempt you, but take nothing from him. Please do not believe a single word from his mouth. Fighting him takes more than magic. It takes your heart to know the truth. And what is the truth? Ninasha kept his voice as low as Elior's. The truth is your heart can gain nothing from the promises of another, Elior urged. If you truly desire something, put in the time and effort to attain it. But even if you attain what you desire, it always carries a price. So be careful what you wish for, I added with a grin. The MKR smiled back. What I believe was a heartfelt moment was interrupted by rustling. We turned toward the darkness to see the tiny man had appeared again. I thought I would give you a moment to explain to these younglings who I am, Rumpelstiltskin teased. Did you really think I had gone, that I would miss continuing our little game? I knew you were still around, Elior confessed. I appreciate your generous time to let me introduce you to my pupils privately. Private, the tiny man scoffed. Dear friend, I heard every word. Also, you mentioned that I was only one of 3. Were you planning to explain who the third is? Or perhaps you hoped they had forgotten? The chuckle from the tiny man was eerie, while Ninasha and I stared at him, who had certainly returned to our presence to entertain his sickened mind. I did my best to study him, while Elior took a deep breath to begin telling us more. Yet before he could, the tiny man jumped on his words. Or maybe not, Rumpelstiltskin shot out. Do you think they would believe you? I do not know of anyone who would believe such a thing. Unless, of course... Perhaps you are right, Elior agreed with a grin that confused the tiny man. Out here in the cold does not seem like the proper place. Maybe we should adjourn indoors to a nice fire and a fresh brew of Jaffa tea. If you are afraid to tell them, Elior, then maybe I could enlighten them, the tiny man cheekily offered. Now, where is the fun in that? Elior held his grin as if he had gotten the better of the wicked imp. You would ruin the surprise. The tiny man scoffed with a loud laugh, and we slowly began walking away from him. "Oh, you have started the game differently this time," Rumpelstiltskin called to Elior. "I look forward to seeing how this one pans out." Daylight had come upon the fortified city of Starville. The sun revealed more destruction than we had anticipated. Walking back into the ruins, we saw Westmain's elite guard clearing the bodies of the dead, along with other citizens who offered to help. We had spent the rest of the night in the woods, meeting our enemy, one of which Elior thought was a greater threat than the rebels. No one asked where we were. No one accused us of running off from the fight. No one looked at us as we made our way to the citadel, the last line of defense that was miraculously intact and untouched. EDOs had destroyed the city square, completely breaking the eastern and southern walls. Westmain soldiers were still dispersing toward both locations to fortify their positions. But the North Tower still stood, which was a welcoming sign that the city remained vigilant to attacks. I shall never forget how Ninasha looked at his people who were finding themselves pulled back into bloodshed by the rebellion in Westmain. As a first-year student at the university, I remember seeing Nodian refugees seeking asylum in Westmain from the civil war in Nod. They had journeyed to Langdon, only to find their home in a poverty-stricken district. Our government pushed to relocate and house them in different areas so that disease and crime would not rise in the streets. Starville was one of them, now a war-stricken place to remind them of home. I pitied them. There was an inn just before the entrance to the citadel. I admit, I felt ashamed that my thoughts moved from poverty-stricken and war-torn refugees to my comforts, a nice cup of tea and a warm bed. Maybe, if anyone else had just faced the dark evils of a tiny and sinister madman, they might throw a little sympathy my way. Perhaps, or perhaps not. Elior's hand reached for a kettle as soon as he entered the inn. He filled it with water and placed it on the rack over the fire. The innkeeper was a soft and pudgy woman, with soft lines running through her face, and a fancy robe tied around her. "How may I help you today, sir?" she embellished her kind tone. "Just the tea and whatever breakfast you have, and your largest and cleanest room," Elior replied politely. "I shall pay double." The woman's eyes widened, and she hurried away upstairs. "Do you know what this place is?" Ninasha lowered his voice to both of us. "This is a rumpy-pumpy lodge." "I know," Elior replied, "but they have the best food and tea in the city with the softest beds." "Bet no one will disturb us," I added. "At least not you." "What do you mean by that?" Ninasha asked. "They will not want to touch you since you have a face only a mother could love," I teased. "Very funny," he snapped back. "If your chest were a little bigger, I would encourage you to apply for a position." "You two can kill each other later," Elior sighed. "Right now, pipe down, eat, drink, and rest up." When we finished our tea and breakfast, the best Jaffa tea I have ever tasted, I opened the door to a room with 3 beds. I remained hesitant to go in with 2 other men, even though Elior was one of them. We were in a house with a particular reputation after all. But the pillows and dark cocoa sheets were so inviting. I practically leapt to find my head had never felt a softer pillow. It was a joy, almost like sleeping on a cloud in the sky. Elior told us he would take the first watch. "The first watch?" Ninasha asked. "The game has begun," the MKR explained. "We are safer here, yet that does not mean the darkness will not try to reach us." "Will you tell us about the third creature?" I asked, sprawling out wider on my bed. "Some other time," Elior bowed as he plopped down in a chair by the window. He pulled a wooden pipe from his inner frock pocket and packed in sweet-scented sage and mugwort. Smoking sage and mugwort is often a relaxing way to pass the time, at least for sophisticated gentlemen, and is usually improper for a lady to take part. I rolled my head away from looking at Elior. I am unsure how much sleep the MKR expected us to find early that morning. I closed my eyes and still saw the tiny man's wicked smile while recalling my encounter with Wendigo in the unlight. Something else, however, stirred while I tried to slumber. I felt aloft, but I could not understand what was happening. I had blurry visions of a meadow surrounded by trees and a soothing evening breeze sweeping over me. As I thought I was dreaming, I believe I caught Ninasha out of the corner of my eye. Voices in the room finally swayed me to open my eyes. Zenobia had joined us along with the other two blockheads, Garvish and Bakama. The room was peaceful with low mumblings between Ninasha and Zenobia. I did not see Elior anywhere. Garvish and Bakama enjoyed a juvenile joke fest, daring one another to sleep with the ugliest wench available. That would mean Agneya, Garvish sneered softly. I am going to burn your face off. I sat up with a quick threat. Garvish and Bakama froze, grabbing tightly to their chairs. I could feel my eyes blaze with a fiery essence. I glanced down at my hand, seeing a fireball swirl and fall warm within it, and this time much larger than I had manifested before. She really should, Zenobia agreed. You boys are too stupid to take anything seriously. If you are not careful, you shall die worse than the others did in the unlight. Elior entered the room, ignoring the squabble, and slowly shut the door behind him. He asked Zenobia for a cup of tea, and we all gathered around the table in the room next to the fireplace. When we all had sat down, Elior voiced his plan. We must learn why Eastgard attacked Starvel, he stated. We mean to travel there then? Ninasha asked. Yes, Elior replied, but not by air. If Eastgard is indeed at war with Westmain now, travelling in the sky is compromised. Would you not do the same thing you did to the other two ships that attacked us? I interjected. No. The MKR shook his head. Crossing their borders now, even in a merchant ship, will raise suspicion. Best, we make it appear as if we are simply peripatetic and have no idea what has happened. Many know your face, Zenobia joined in. I am sure even in Eastgard they will recognise you, and certainly they will know us by how we dress. No one knows what I did to those two ships, Elior replied. Even now, a rumour about the Admiral's prowess who brought us here is being spread. People shall believe he destroyed the Eastgard ships, not me. Then, we dress like Eastgardians to keep the cover and the intent of our visit, Bakama said. I was surprised by his willingness to participate. Perhaps, Elior pondered. Does not sound too hard, went Garvish's loud mouth as I expected. The only problem is, we would need a cargo that would not be expensive. Elior ignored the comment. Wait a moment, I said. What if we were not merchants at all? But instead, we are who we are. Explorers who just found books in the unlight? I saw Elior smile wide at me. Are you suggesting we travel to Eastgard with the books we picked up from down there? Bakama sneered. Listen, you stupid sus! I felt my eyes light up with fire again. Pay attention if you do not want me to fry your hide. We can sell the books we have anywhere we want. They will go for a high price, and our alibi is true. The merchandise is already in our possession. Let us go to Eastgard with the excuse that we have heard we could get a better deal for our tomes. Duh, Garvish mocked at Bakama. I almost chuckled seeing them bicker among each other now. Ninasha voiced his approval and Zenobia joined him. I believe this is a marvellous idea, Agneya, Elior said. But if anyone asks, you are not from Westmain. Let them know you are from Nod instead, from a clan in the north. I had to ditch my royal crimson garbs. Although I needed to stitch a few hems back together, I could not be seen even travelling with them in my belongings. Most explorers from Nod wear tan-hide clothes. I even had to hock my lucky gold and pinstriped ruffle shorts. I traded my clothes to one of the ladies who worked at the inn and thought about what new ruffle shorts I would buy next to make them my lucky ones. I acquired a tan-hide clincher ruffle skirt, an ankle-length skirt in the back that only drops to about the upper thigh in the front, revealing a woman's bare thighs and garter. The skirt is worn mainly by young women, strategizing to attract a union bond, or perhaps wanting some attention. Commonly, Clincher ruffle skirts are fashionably worn with knee-high boots with knee-high socks, which the woman obliged not to allow me to trot off as a fashion nightmare, and threw in a pair of her own. The skirt was exceptionally darling, with a stone damask design stitched into it. And I can honestly say that it made my thighs appear somewhat thinner, leaving much more room for my posterior than my skinny denim trousers. Elior then assisted in purchasing 2 more pairs of tan-hide skinny denim trousers as I needed them, along with more thermal tights from the lodge's head private collection. Admittedly, I never thought I would enjoy shopping in a rumpy-pumpy closet. When I emerged from the room with Zenobia, I noticed my Clincher ruffle skirt caught the eyes of both idiots and Ninasha. It feels good for a woman to turn some heads. Our travel plans, Elior believed, needed to go through the south to Folesk, one of the 3 rebel cities. From there, we would find a boat and move along the southern coast to reach Yare and Po, 2 small outpost towns in Eastgard. Then, we would catch an Eastgard airship travelling to Havensire, the mega fortress and capital of the kingdom, ruled in part by the Ravencast clan and the Purebone clan. Starvel was not far from Folesk, and we trekked out into the Deadlands under the cover of night. The moon did not shine, and we followed Elior's dim light for miles, until we reached a clearing to see the town just after our 3rd sunrise. Gladly, we made it to Folesk without incident. But I never would have imagined the poverty stench filling the air in such a hot, steamy mess. I was sure I would contract an incurable disease, moving through the crowds of people, breathing heavily all over us, and sending solemn gazes our way as we entered. Sewage piled high in the streets as we ventured further in, noticing people vomit on the street corners from the rank. Then moved on as if nothing had happened. I have never been to Folesk, I told Elior, grabbing his arm to get his attention, and then holding my nose with the other hand. Folesk has an interesting story, the MKR replied. People used to be friendly here. Then the rebellion broke out and the town fell into chaos. All their leaders joined the war, and now there is no one to take care of the town. I am not sure I know what the war is about, I admitted. All I heard is the rebels want a new system of government. True, Elior continued. They believe everyone should profit from one another, under a system of government that prohibits private ownership, where merchants should not benefit from a private profit, but instead be taxed heavily to support the people. That does not make sense, Ninasha chimed in next to us. If a business cannot turn a profit, how does it grow to provide further openings for new employment or generate economic growth from its services? They would grow much slower, I replied. But it would not help free market trade, which essentially delivers to us the ability to buy and sell at the value of supply and demand. Essentially, we would have to sell our goods from exploration at a set price instead of being able to sell to the highest bidder. True, because the government would control the price, Ninasha agreed. Westmain has already implemented systems to help support its people, Elior explained. But the rebels wish to overthrow the government for more reasons than abolishing the free market. It is a power struggle that the leaders of the rebellion are striving to attain. Once in power, there would be a new type of corruption, and the government would be in full control to not listen to the people's voice. Fortunately, not all of us care about such things. We heard a voice behind us. We had made our way to the docks of Folesk, where a new foul stench had invaded my nostrils. I peered towards 7 rowdy-looking individuals standing behind what I considered an ugly child. Instead, it was a short and stout man, with muscles bulging from every orifice of his frame. His long, scraggly beard held bits of food and chew, a sight I had never seen. His top hat had a torn brim, with teeth marks all around it, appearing as if he chewed on his hat. His dark cocoa eyes were bloodshot, and his shirt sleeves ripped off, revealing his biceps, thrice the size of my thighs. His arms were scarred with provocative tattoos, apart from one that was a simple heart that read, Mother. The others with him appeared no better, as they were all covered in grease and grime, and stunk like rotting fish from the sea. It has been a long time since I have seen you, Elior, the short man piped up. He was not as short as Rumpelstiltskin, mind you, but his height was not far above, hunching over as if the muscles on his shoulders and neck were trying to throw his face into the ground. "How are you, Mike?" Elior asked with a grin. "How am I?" the short man replied with enough enthusiasm to rouse curious looks from every bystander within 500 footsteps of us. "I'm Mike Fink, King of the Sea, and the best blazon steamboat captain." Before I could open my eyes, I was the only infant to refuse my mother's milk and trade it for my father's booze. I'm a regular screamer of the open waters who only loves women, wine, and the waves. I'm half bull and half ironclad. I can out-talk, outrun, out-jump, out-fight, out-shoot, out-brag, out-drink, and out-maneuver any man who dares challenge me. I'm a no-holds-barred, rough-and-tumble jackknob who cooks sea monsters for my breakfast and cacks out sunshine with tremendous thunder. I'm the craziest and meanest explorer you've ever seen, and my snapper can jabber, and bite off a man's head simultaneously. "Give me a break," Garvish sneered under his breath. The gaze Meek sent back his way was murderous. He quickly walked up, grabbed Garvish by his privates, and pulled him down to his level, making Garvish give a high-pitched squeal. "Are you looking for some exercise today, boy?" The steamboat captain gritted his teeth. I could see Garvish's face flushing up as his head had quickly dropped down, just to where Meek wanted it to be, in range of his fist. "'Cause if you are, by the time I'm done with you, you won't know if you've been brawling or if you were someone's prison bait." "No need." Elior kept his calm grin. The boy has a mouth on him, but I believe he has learned his lesson and should apologise before he loses something more than his pride. Garvish nodded and managed to squeak an apology, which seemed to suffice, and Meek let him go. "Where you headed?" Elior asked. The crowd began to disperse, seeing that no blood would be spilled. What a pity. "Getting ready to head out for Yare and Po," Meek answered. "You know my travelling schedule so well." The short man's mouth opened with a wide smile. "Can you take on some passengers?" Elior lowered his voice. "I can," Meek matched the MKR's tone. "But I'm guessing you don't want people to know where you're headed by how your voice is dropped." "You know me so well," Elior's reply dripped with amusing sarcasm. "How much?" "1,000 per head," Mike bargained. "There are 6 of us," Elior said. "That seems reasonable. There is me and the rest here." Elior motioned toward us. Meek took a big sigh when his eyes landed on me. "I don't think she can come," he said. "My crew would want to touch her very much." "I understand that," Elior agreed, "but make them understand that if they do touch her, I will slice off their arms and pluck out their eyeballs. Ain't that just the thing?" The short man let out a bellowing laugh. "I knew I liked you, Elior, but that'll make the price go higher." "How high?" Elior asked. 10,000. Meek made no hesitation. "Take it or leave it." Elior stared at the short man, who did not budge from smiling. I watched Elior's eyes move from their viridescent meadow fields, sunny day, azure skies, and golden starlight, but his face remained deadpan. It brought Meek's smile down to a nervous grin. 7,000? The short man finally suggested. "We have a contract," Elior nodded. "Finally," Meek replied, regaining his composure. "We set sail tomorrow morning. Now, if you'll excuse me, you're keeping me from glugging." We were not far behind Meek and his band of misfits. Elior seemed to know the waterfront well enough, so, again, we would bed in a place of disease-ridden ladies and cosy beds. We had time to wash and rest just before the banquet hall opened. I sat beside Elior and Ninasha in the loft seating, observing the commotion below. Meek's crew emerged spotless from the shadows of the ground floor entrance, each basking momentarily in the smells, and no doubt the brawls that awaited them. I hardly noticed Meek approaching our table with Zenobia by his side. They both sat at our table, and I could not help but feel something peculiar had transpired between them. Zenobia was beaming, and Meek appeared less on edge than when we first met him. Elior pretended not to notice, but I knew what had occurred. I stared wide-eyed at Zenobia. She caught my gaze and gave me a shrug. "Don't be so surprised," Meek said. "Zenobia and I have explored together before." "What is this about?" Ninasha asked. Of course, he would be oblivious. "Never you mind," I snapped. "Just keep out of it." "Sweet girl," Zenobia nabbed my attention with a gruff tone. "Why not mind your own business?" "Because I am completely lost," I snapped back. "Remain calm," Elia insisted. I peered down at my hand, beginning to burn red. "It's quite all right," Meek interjected with a pertinent smirk. "It's obvious what's bothering you, Missy. You think you're better than I am." "Of course I am," I ruthlessly replied. "You are a scoundrel." "I'm also a father, little turd." Meek leaned forward and fired back. "Keep it civil," Elliot interjected. "We are not going to turn this into a mountain." "I was a father." Meek eased his shoulders, shifting to a less aggressive posture. "You don't know who I am, and you don't know Zenobia, and you don't even know my crew. Yet you insist that you're better than us. What have you lost in your life? What makes you the judge and jury of how we're supposed to live?" "He has a point," Ninasha muffled with a mouthful of food. "You do seem to think you're better than everyone at times, even me." The room suddenly went pale, and the faces of everyone became faded. Only Elior appeared in clear view, keeping a comforting countenance. His eyes were glowing, and it felt like considerable time passed, but only one thought held in my mind. "What are they all talking about?" I asked. "Your anger stems from pride," Elior said plainly. I could not believe my ears. "Even now, in your heart, you feel as if everyone is turning on you, even me." "You are!" I shouted. "No," Elior shook his head. "Though he is unkind in his approach, Meek is not wrong. Deep down, you know this. I am not here to condemn you, Agneya. However, if you do not take correction where you can find it, to search within yourself what wisdom you must learn to become what I know you to be, then you shall continue to doubt and keep others away, even me. You will shut people out and succumb to the darkness." "I do not wish to feel this way," I admitted. "I do not wish to feel that I am better than everyone. It must be something from my mother." "You cannot control the power awakened within you without humility, should you desire to use your power for good," Elior explained. "Learn it wherever you can, even if you truly believe you are right. Being right does not matter when it swells up obscurity within your heart." I blinked and everything returned to what it was before. I knew Elior had been inside my mind, speaking to me, teaching me, and helping me see what I needed to know. "I am sorry," I said calmly and clearly. "I did not mean to be so critical." "That was unexpected," Ninasha admitted, making me want to shove my fist into his face. But I breathed a heavy sigh, and Zenobia nodded to let me know I was forgiven. "Sorry," Mike blabbed. "I don't need your half-lipped apology. You can go." "Manners, Mike," Elior interceded, his eyes flashing gold. "Let us turn this into a more pleasant evening. Tell us about who we shall be sailing with." Mike reluctantly changed the subject by downing a colossal gulp of booze, and I listened to the steamboat captain speak to us about his shipmates, as he called them. Foremost, Meek alluded to his first mate aboard the sea-born scoundrel, Darby Crockett, a tall, slender man with lanky muscles, dark cocoa hair, tanned cream veil skin, and a handsome jawline. He sounded like a quiet and humble man when he greeted us as he passed by, but I could tell he was no stranger to the perils of being an explorer. I had come to know that he held a gentle spirit unless trouble brewed. Elior whispered to my thoughts that Meek was amusing to Darby. He was also a better shot than Meek and much cleverer, but he allowed Meek to be the leader, as Darby did not like drawing attention to himself. A slight giggle rang out from me, which halted Meek from speaking. "Sorry," I said. "Sometimes I just laugh." "Are you well?" Ninasha asked. "You are mentally slipping." "It must be that time of the month. Emotional things," I replied. "Please continue, Meek." Next was Darby's best friend, Reggie Gusell, another tanned creme veil with almost sable hair. He was reasonably competent when not drinking, an extremely talented engineer who could fix anything on the Seabourn Scoundrel, but had a more challenging time fixing his mouth when he knocked back a few. He stood a step down from Darby's height, but also with a slight stoop in his stance. Big, sphere stone shimmering eyes, a scraggly jawline of whiskers to fill in a patchy beard, and a consistent, goofy and crooked smile. The next crew member, Meek pointed out, was a woman by the name of Cassie Bones, an East Guardian oval eye, creme veil woman with long, shiny and straight sable hair tied into a tail on the top of her head as if she was ready to fight. She appeared to be able to outmuscle most fit men. I immediately interrupted Meek to explain why I cost more than the others, just because I was a younger woman. "Did you not say that your crew would try to touch me? Why do they not try to touch her?" Meek's answer made me feel somewhat fearful, but poked a chuckle out of Elior. "She would not want to touch you like the others," the sea captain said, taking back another gulp. "She would touch you with her fist. She does not like pretty faces other than hers. Drunkards try to take advantage of her, and they regret it the next morning when they wake up with a broken jaw or worse. Maybe they do not wake up at all. My crew has learned to respect her. Her hand-to-hand combat can rival even Make on his best day," Elior poked, a comment that only made the sea captain roll his eyes. But I turned my gaze toward Cassie. A little makeup and styling would have made her more femininely presentable. Her bright, viridescent eyes kept darting around for anyone who gave her the wrong type of glance. In the short time we had spent chatting, I had witnessed her get into 4 different brawls, ending quickly with her, yes, breaking the jaw of one man, hearing it crack all the way from where I sat. The other 3 went down completely stiffed out and likely concussed. Meek introduced another crew member, Wild Willie, as he came up to drink with 3 different women, scantily clad and drunker than he appeared. His skin held a rich cocoa veil, and his teeth glistened with an unnatural heaven hue. He described Wild Willie as twice the Joker, 3 times the lover, and 4 times the fighter. A brash mouth, but had the skills to back up his claims. He was an ex-soldier from one of the finest sharpshooter divisions of West Main. He could reload faster, shoot keener, and love a woman faster than it takes to pour him a shot. I watched him for a while, keenly seducing the women to his chambers when he pushed back his long sable hair from his azure speckled eyes. It turned my stomach. Make seemed to lose interest in the conversation when the last 2 of his crew joined us in the loft seating area. A large, heavy man and a small boy sat in the opposite corner with hot plates of food and 2 large glass goblets of wine. "Is that boy drinking?" I asked, feeling my mandible drop. "Folesk is an outlaw town filled with rebels against West Main," Ninasha said. "How does that surprise you?" Elior did not flinch at my question. He watched Meek grab Zenobia by the hand and lead her around the balcony to a hallway. They disappeared into the dim lighting and likely into a room for what I could only assume was another round of sensualism. "That is Will Bide," Elior said, redirecting my attention away from the 2 Twitter-pated spectacles and toward the large man sitting with the boy. "People call him Wide Berth. He was once a man with a family. Now a presentable drunk," Ninasha teased. "Now, who thinks they are better than everyone?" I replied sarcastically. Ninasha rolled his eyes and waited for Elior to continue. I saw that Wide Berth dressed fancy, but his pupils were glazed over from drinking. He seemed quiet though, peacefully pouring in his intoxication with his shaky sable hands. "He is a troubled man," Elior explained. "He lost his family to a boating accident many years ago. He and Mate can identify with one another. Watch your words about him around Meek, or the steamboat captain might cut your head off before I can do anything about it." Wide Berth was indeed very round, but built like a boulder. He presented a slicked-back styling of his sable hair and a clean shave, except for a well-curled moustache. His face appeared to swallow his dark cocoa eyes, and he hardly chewed his food before stuffing his cheeks again. "Who is the child with him?" I asked. "That is Doc Farias," Elio answered. "He avoided me mostly the last time I travelled with them. He is a baby-faced charmer, 1 minute, and then picks your pocket the next. His tiny nimble fingers are impressively terrific at sleight of hand, which I guess makes him a great cheater at cards." "He looks adorable," I admitted. The boy's dark cocoa hair drooped over his cocoa veil face and curled up on the ends. Then I watched one of the ladies of the house approach the boy's side of the table. She sat beside him, flirtatiously, and ran her fingers through the boy's hair. Again, my chin dropped, seeing the boy respond by placing his hand on her thigh. His eyes lit up as she cooed over him. "I cannot believe this," I said, turning away. "She is trying to woo him." "Welcome to the unfeigned world," Elio grinned. "You are experiencing the sleaze that ensnares many souls, even the young." Ninasha looked down at his plate and slowly pushed it away from him. I did the same and then took an enormous gulp of water. I looked up at Elio, who suddenly appeared to be distracted. I did not know what it was or how he could hear anything, with the racket of music and drunken theatrics. Then I began to feel the floor trembling, ever so slightly at first. A sudden quake knocked me out of my seat, and Ninasha collapsed with me. He caught my head under his arm to keep it from slamming into the floor. I peered up at Elio, who had not budged but remained perfectly balanced. When the enormous tremor ceased, he slowly peeked over the railing. "What was that?" Ninasha stammered out. "The game is afoot," Elio replied. Another tremor shook the foundation again, and a large hole collapsed in the main floor next to the bar, with several patrons swallowed by the opening, and their screams abruptly silenced. I regained my footing and peered over the railing to see fur-covered creatures. Each stood on their hind legs and snatched helpless folk into the grasp of their claws, before clamping down with prominent buck teeth to end the screams of their helpless victims. Metal armour was scattered across their shoulders, thighs, chest, and long snouts. Their eyes beat crimson with a hunger I could only describe as lustful, as when Wendigo began to take over me. "Gloom Noras!" I heard someone shout, only to realise Widebirth had aimed with his buzz-saw rifle and began firing into the fray. "Use what you know," Elio told us as he drew his drill guns and began firing. "Ninasha, see if you can seal up that hole." Ninasha began to stretch out his hands when something yanked him to the ground. A Gloom Nora had snatched him, and the treacherous vermin bit down on his mystic silver prosthetic arm as he lifted it to defend himself. The vermin's teeth shattered, forcing it to rear back in agony before receiving a drill bit through its head from Elio. "Close it up!" Elio shouted again to Ninasha. The MCAR's eyes suddenly darted toward a doorway, where he and I noticed a tiny man grinning, with sharp, jagged teeth. A dark bird squawked from its roost atop his torn hat, while two others latched onto his arms. I did not wait to mix words. I felt my body ignite, my entire arms lighting up with wilder flames than anything I had ever conjured. Rumpelstiltskin's eyes widened, seeing the display of my power. I hurled a blazing ball of flame in his direction, blasting the wall outward and bringing dwindling sunlight through smoke and fire. Unfortunately, I did not see a scorched, tiny body in the haze. Elio touched my shoulder to let me know I did well. "Regroup!" I heard a familiar steamboat captain's voice shout. Meek fired off a couple of rounds from a buzzsaw rifle into a Gloom Nora, blocking the path of Cassie Bones coming up the stairs. She wielded 2 razor-sharp machetes and did not have too much trouble cutting through the vermin as they came at her. Wild Willie could hardly stand, but his accuracy stayed precise as he stumbled out, seeing what disturbed his night of pleasure. He hit each Gloom Nora accurately through the cranium, with every drill bit he fired from his elaborately stylish drill bit, guns-plated copper with sus hide-wrapped handles, even with his pants barely buckled around his waist. Ninasha began to try again as I saw Cassie join us. cutting down Gloom Noras trying to come up the stairs. They were jumping up to the railing from the first floor, only to be shot off by Meek and his crew. "I am having a hard time," Nanasha admitted. "There are too many distractions." Elior did not answer. He took a deep breath and manifested hundreds of bright orbs that rose from his body. In a single moment, the orbs erupted into beams of light, striking through the overwhelming numbers of Gloom Noras climbing through the hole. Screeching bounced around the room as the monstrous vermin were sliced into sizzling pieces. And for a moment, all remained still. "Show off," we heard Doc Farius break the silence with his unflattering, cracking voice. But another voice unexpectedly came to us, and I felt it. I felt a presence that began stirring something in me. Wendigo was beginning to climb to the surface. "There are no more distractions," I stammered to Nanasha. I could feel the voice of hunger intensify. "What are you waiting for?" "Close up the hole." "Something is not right," Nanasha replied. "Something is preventing me from touching the earth to collapse it." Across the way, Elior's eyes locked with the tiny man, his grin still scoffing at us. "Everyone to the scoundrel," Meek shouted. "We're getting out of here!" "Through there!" Wideberth earnestly pointed to the burnt-out hole in the wall. Elior waited for all of us to pass by him, feeling the echoing ripple of hunger. I felt, as could Elior, I am sure Wendigo had ceased climbing. If the creature had pressed onward, all of us would have been touched, never to forget the unbearable possession of hunger it imposed on the spirit. "Rumpelstiltskin has been trying to get Wendigo to come into the light for some time now," Elior said with a look, his voice echoing in my mind. "But Wendigo is a creature that desires the dark. However, this is the closest I have ever witnessed him finding his way to the surface." We stood momentarily, allowing the others to jump to the ground first. Then Elior and I followed. More saw blade and drill bit fire followed. I grabbed Nanasha's arm, yanked him to his feet, and noticed him fighting to remain stabilized. Nanasha admitted to me later that the creature's hunger had indeed reached him. We treaded swiftly behind the others. Wild Willie was making sure his wenches remained close, although the one who was nearest Doc was suddenly nabbed and devoured. Wild Willie blasted every round of his drill bit guns into them, but it was too late. His eyes pulsed with rage as he began to reload. "Move it!" Mike shouted to him. "She's gone and you're not staying here." Wild Willie reluctantly followed Meek and the rest, pushing the other two women onward in front of him. He appeared highly protective of them, shooting any rodent that remotely came within range. Gloom Noras were overwhelming the town now, and many more emerged from various holes in the ground. We were not far from Meek's ironclad, and had moved away from the soft soil beneath our feet. The vermin pursued us, even when we reached the dock where the steamboat waited in the harbour. I heard saw blades whiz over our heads, coming from the ironclad. Its engines roared to full steam, and I could make out Darby Crockett's figure on the upper deck, raining down cover fire for us. Cassie Bones chopped one of the rope ties and swiftly approached the second, waiting for us to get aboard. Wild Willie and his wenches leaped to the deck, along with Wideberth and Doc. Meek and Zenobia climbed aboard, followed by Nanasha, Elior and I. Surprisingly, Garvish and Bickham were already aboard the ship, following Darby and Reggie aboard earlier that evening. They were bringing up a buzzsaw firing gun from below deck. Nanasha jumped in to help them carry the boxes of ammo. The two idiots mounted the gun to the side and jammed in the large clip of saw blades. Bikama began pulling the trigger into the ravenous vermin almost to the boat. Cassie cut the last line and jumped aboard. Meek was already in the helm house on the top deck and pulled the blowhorn, a signal to the engine room that the boat was ready for departure. He grabbed the helm and wheeled it away from the dock, setting the seaborne scoundrel into the waters. The steamboat captain started laughing, while some other crew members wildly joined him. "You don't see that every day, lads," Mike proclaimed with a smile. I found it insensitive that they were laughing, considering everyone else in the town was most likely corpses. But I said nothing. Make's laughter was short-lived as we watched 3 other steamboats take off from the dock. "Those things are sailing the steamboats," Darby called out. There was just enough sunlight to see who was on board, and I did not need spy spectacles to see the ugly, disease-infested crew of the other 3 ships. The seaborne scoundrel held high dependability when facing weather conditions and crashing waves, but not so steady when trying to outrun lighter steamboats filled with flesh-eating monsters. "Looks like we're going to have to dig a few watery graves," Mike enthusiastically bellowed. "Get ready for some fun, lads!" I watched Cassie emerge below deck with a buzzsaw firing gun herself. Wild Willie followed behind her with 2 boxes of ammo. They went up to the second deck and I followed them, cutting the wenches off. Darby uncovered what appeared to be a cannon, or at least the barrel of one, as there was no pipe attachment to the breech. He began packing a black powder into the muzzle, and then placed a cannonball in after it. He also took notice of the confusion on my face. "This here is an antique," he explained with a grin, "but she still works." He cut a small piece of rope, or so it appeared, and placed it into what he called a touch hole. I thought he was being vulgar, but he reassured me that it was the proper historical name. The cannon sat on a wooden platform with 4 wooden wheels and tied to a pulley system. Darby tugged on the rope to ease the cannon forward and waited for the vermin-filled steamboats to draw closer to us. The first boat began coming alongside the ironclad when Darby lit the rope inside the cannon. He told me to cover my ears, and just in time I could still clearly hear the thunderclap blast. It shot out the cannonball, which exploded into the hull of a Gloom Noah's steamboat. Bits and pieces of wood flew in all directions, even landing back on our deck. "That is how you drown rats," Wild Willie hollered. There was a roar of cheers from the crew, and Darby began reloading the cannon. With the other 2 boats not ceasing their pursuit, Cassie and Becomer began firing saw blades into the other boats. Yet, before the saw blades hit their marks, they bounced off what appeared to be thin air. As the boats drew closer, I could see some type of magic was parrying the saw blades. Protection spell. Elior broke my gaze from the boats for a moment. See that dim crimson light where the saw blades are hitting around the ship? It repels metal objects from penetrating through. "What do we do?" I asked. "Use magic, of course," Elior replied. "Now is another great time for you and Nanasha to practice." "What can I possibly do out here?" Nanasha startled me. "I control soil and rock, not water." "True," Elior admitted, "but that does not mean you cannot reach the soft soil beneath us. Reach down and pull it above the waves." Nanasha shrugged and said he would try. We each targeted a boat and began conjuring what we could. I concentrated on summoning a ball of fire larger than I had ever done before. I could see Darby's eyes widen as he watched the ball of flame grow bigger than my body, hovering in a mass above my head. I began feeling weary, took aim, and hurled it onto the boat I was targeting. The massive ball of flame landed on the bow and erupted into ashes. The steamboat suddenly swallowed water and the rest dove violently into the sea. Nanasha, on the other hand, was having trouble again. "Something is wrong," Nanasha said. "I cannot seem to feel any power to do what I want to do." "Take a breath." I could hear Elior speak into Nanasha's mind. "Your emotions are clouding you from what is true." I could see Nanasha relax. His hand remained outstretched toward the steamboat swiftly approaching our port side. He took several deeper breaths before loudly shouting and shoving his arm upward. Nothing happened. His head sunk low and stared back at Elior. Nanasha's disappointment quickly faded when a violent burst of muck and sand flew up from the seabed, so massive and close that it almost capsized the ironclad. But it flung the Gloom Noah's steamboat into the air, and then, as if grasped by a giant hand, yanked it back down below the surface of the sea with an explosive splash, slamming more unforgiving waves against the ironclad and threw all of us to our backside, apart from one. "You do much better when you are calm, Nanasha," Elior said, standing over us. "I can see the power inside you is growing." "What the bloody balls was that?" Meek's voice roared as he hopped back to his feet. "Sorry, Captain Fink, sir." Nanasha tried to apologise, getting to his feet. "I did not know it would be like that." "Never mind that stupid boy," Mike replied. He pushed past Nanasha to stand before Elior, almost knocking the stupid boy back down. What fiends like that doing on the surface? And not to mention sailing steamboats like they know what the bloody balls they're doing? They belong in the unlight. "Things are not going to remain where they belong," Elior serenely stated. Meek huffed, shook his head, and then walked down to the main deck. "You did great," I heard Zenobia's voice behind me. I gave her a slight smirk, but she could tell I felt exhausted from the ordeal. "You appear exhausted. You should lie down." Zenobia reached out for my hand. I let her take it, and we walked down to the ship's cabins. The seaborne scoundrel was more sizable than I thought when I first saw it briefly from the waterfront, as we were all rushing to get aboard. There were plenty of rooms, but only a tiny space for a bed and the door to slide shut. "Would you tell me more about you and Meek?" I asked Zenobia as she opened the door to an available cabin. She sighed heavily, but then nodded her consent. "It has been over 10 years ago now," Zenobia began. "Meek and I had a child together. Our boy was so beautiful, and I, a joyful bride of the best steamboat captain on the sea. Meek was a bragger back then, a witty merchant who rapidly became wealthy. We both shared a love for adventure even when our baby came along. We did not want to stop seeing the world together." "What was your baby's name?" I asked. "Pelagios," Zenobia replied, her eyes swelling with tears. "One day, a storm swept upon us without warning. I was holding our baby with Meek on the upper deck, sailing back from Krieg. Before I could get below, an enormous wave crashed against our boat and ripped my baby from my hands. The sea nabbed him, stole him from us. I vowed I would never set foot on a boat again. But Meek loved the sea. Despite the tragedy, he could not find it in his heart to stop sailing. So, he and I went our separate ways. And now, here I am, back where he is, and breaking my vow." "You just left him?" I asked. "Does that mean you are still married to him?" "I guess it does," Zenobia admitted. "Meek has his reputation to uphold. He may pinch a wench's rump now and again, but deep down, he held true to me. He confessed that to me earlier this evening, and would hate for you to know. Do keep it under your hat." I smiled and hugged her goodnight. "I will, I promise, until I write it down later. It is all for historical purposes after all."